it was published in the Daily Nation. So there is the question of income tax, amendment of Section 2 of the Income Tax Act in the definition of winnings and inserts new definition of digital content monetization, immovable property person and related person, amendment of Section 4A of the Act, which relates to income from businesses where foreign exchange loss or gain may be realized, to provide that foreign exchange loss shall be deferred and claimed over a period of not more than 3 years from the date the loss was realized by a company whose gross interest paid or payable to a non-resident person exceeds 30% of the company's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation and amortization in any year of income. Amendment of Section 5 of the Act on Income from Employment to provide that club entrance and subscription fees disallowed against the employer's income shall be deemed as gains or profits, among other amendments. Amendment by insertion of Section 7B to include tax payable on the repatriated income. This, I think, is the next one is, I think, what has really gotten a lot of attention. Amendment of Section 12C to provide for a charge of turnover tax for businesses with a turnover of 500,000 but does not exceed 15 million. Amendment by insertion of Section 12F to introduce the digital asset tax payable by a person or income derived from the transfer or exchange of digital assets. We saw that on the front page. It was highlighted on the front page of the Standard. A proposed amendment to the first schedule of the Act to provide tax exemption for royalties paid to a non-resident person by a company undertaking the manufacture of human vaccines, interest paid to a resident person or non-resident person by a company undertaking the manufacture of human vaccines, investment income from a post-retirement medical fund, and payment in the form of funds transfer from a post-retirement medical fund to a medical insurance cover provider. Amendments to the third schedule, and it goes on. Let's scroll further down on VAT. Several amendments, including to remove from the zero-rated list inputs or raw material either produced locally or imported supplied to pharmaceutical manufacturers in Kenya for manufacturing medicaments, inputs and raw material, whether produced locally or imported, supplied to manufacturers of agricultural pest control products, agricultural pest control products, but in the same vein to provide an exemption of pharmaceutical substances for retail sale for medical, surgical, dental or veterinary purposes. The Tax Appeals Tribunal Act, the bill proposes to amend this act to streamline the process and timelines of resolving disputes and settling disputes out of the Tax Appeals Tribunal, to require a party who is aggrieved by a tax decision to pay a deposit of at least 20% of the disputed tax before filing an appeal. Again, this is an issue in contention. We have the Excise Duty Act. And I see here that amend first schedule part 1 to impose excise duty for various items such as imported fish, powdered juice, human hair, wigs, false beards. I thought it's only actors who do these false beards. Artificial nails, imported cement, imported cellular phones and imported paints, among others, and increase gambling taxes, gaming, betting, lotteries and price completion from the current 7.5% to 20% of the amount wagered. And I had Raila Odinga say beauty is not a luxury, it employs many. I saw you also tweeted about it, Wanjiku, so we'll be getting into that shortly. Let me cross over to the other half of the page and get a sense of what the other issues are. And scrolling to the top here, let us see. We've talked about what is it called? Gambling and betting, that has increased from 7.5%. Let's see. This has to do with, okay, let's just scroll further down to the Miscellaneous Fees and Levies Act. Amendment of Section 7 to reduce the import declaration fee from 3.5% to 2.5%. Amend Section 8, reduce the Railways Development Fund levy from 2.5% to 1.5%. Introduction of a new Section 7A to introduce the Export and Investment Promotion Levy to be at the rate provided in the third schedule. And now the issue of housing and the 3%. Amend the Employment Act 2007 by inserting a new Section 31B to provide for the deductions of payments by employers and employees to the National Housing Development Fund established under I lost my page. Housing Act at 3% of the employee's basic salary, providing benefits of an employee contributing to the fund. It also provides for the regulations that shall prescribe the qualifications. Let's see, anything else that is contentious that I have missed? I don't think so, but you have until this publication tells us until the 20th of May to submit your memoranda on the subject. So now let me invite and just get a general sense of what my panelists think of the Finance Bill 2023 before we get into the nitty-gritties. And I'll start with you, Wanjiku. I saw you tweeted, and this is, when was this? This was on May the 5th. And you retweeted and responded also to a tweet by Julian Zabuko, who was telling us tonight on NTV Kenya between 8 and 9 p.m. a special edition of Business Redefined where we unpack the details of the Finance Bill 2023. You responded saying the Kenyan government through the Finance Bill 2023 proposes a raft of tax measures to finance the 2023 budget. Taxation of hair products is of particular interest for the many women entrepreneurs working in the sector. The gender analysis of these measures is therefore critical. Why a gender analysis?
First of all, thank you, Olive, for having us on the show and taking an interest in our work. Kenya Gender Budget Network is basically a network of CBOs and individuals throughout the country. We have a growing membership of 66 different members, and we ideally work to participate or support our members in participating in the budget processes in Kenya at national and at local levels. And so we continue to look at the budget, of course, from a gender lens. The reason we look at it from a gender lens is because we feel that when you look at a budget from a gender lens, then you first interrogate the 3 wives and the 1 husband. What, where, why, and how.
Okay.
The husband, in this case, is the most important, the how, especially when we're talking about budget issues. So how are we going to raise funds? How are we going to use them? We have had a lot of challenges with how in this country. For politicians, the where is also a very interesting part of the question. So we look at mainly the why are we doing it, and the how are we going to get it done. And so coming back to your question, Kenya Kwanza has touched or speaks towards the hustler agenda. When they touch something as small, seemingly small as false hair, beauty products, cosmetics, they are touching the heart of the hustlers. They are touching saloonists, they are touching beauticians, they are touching the small people who are just advertising their wigs. This budget is an interesting because it's like a rat. The rat bites, then blows, bites, then blows. So we have something that looks good, and then all of a sudden, when you finish reading the sentence, it's not as good as you thought it would be. So this budget for Kenya Kwanza, being their first finance bill, is difficult for hustlers, especially bearing in mind that you have to look at where we are as a country economically. We are coming from a spiral of COVID. We are coming from the whole Ukraine-Russia war that has affected the world. And so even the economics of our country are not necessarily our own economics, But there's been a spiral of a lot of things that have made people unable to afford things that they used to find comfortably affordable to themselves.
So you do not find that this is a hustler-friendly finance bill?
Not at all.
All right. Daktari, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Yes, sorry? Oh, I thought you were going to continue that sentence. Good to have you in studio. Perhaps you can tell us what this finance bill is all about and why it matters in the budget-making process.
Yes, I think the finance bill, given the economic times that Kenya is and other countries in the world, where we have a lot of challenges, and for Kenya in particular, we have a large debt burden. The finance bill is very critical at this particular time. And I think the main interest of the government is to raise finances so that it can be able to have a lot of money and borrow less, or if possible not to borrow, so that it can be able to do the things that government is supposed to do. That has to do with the payment of civil servants and other development activities that the government undertakes. So as usual, all the governments depend on budgets to collect their revenue on taxes so that they have some money which they can use for development purposes and also to meet other government obligations. And when you look at this finance bill, I would agree that it is really not hustlers friendly, because to begin with, the government wants to expand that tax base. It wants to have more money to bring more people in the tax bracket so that it can be able to raise that much needed finances. Now, if the government doesn't raise money through taxation, the other option would be to reduce its costs so that the spending is less, and therefore they are able to use the funds that they have to do what they can do. So this budget is critical for government to have money in a time when we have a lot of borrowing and the debt burden is of great concern. But on the other hand, you know, when we say where the money is coming from, then it touches on the very small businesses. If you look at what the turnover tax of 1 to 3%, which has been raised from 1 to 3%, and you see that it has been extended backwards to cover much smaller businesses with turnovers of 500,000 shillings, which on the other hand, before turnover tax would begin from over 1 million, but now we bend backwards so that we can bring more people, and these people who are earning, who have businesses that make 500,000 shillings per year, those are small businesses. That is where the hustler is. So when the government taxes that, then it touches at the very heart of the hustler. Where people are, you know, informal businesses, where majority of Kenyans are informed. And I would like to add, where 58% of informal businesses are women. So, and most of the businesses in Kenya are micro in nature. So when we do that, then it touches at the very heart of the hustler, that is art form. The other important thing is, if you look at this budget, it has, of course, brought in the value-added tax for fuel products. And yet we know that fuel is really the heart of the economy. You know, it's about transportation. Everybody is using transport. So when the VAT, you know, it goes up, when the government imposes VAT, we expect to see that in the pump price. If pump price goes up, it will be passed back to the passengers, to that common man who uses the matatu, who uses the buses, and all that. And also, we know that most of the production uses petroleum fuels. So that again means we would expect prices to go up. And that means we are not likely to see inflation being contained any sooner. And that is a concern for every hustler, for all of us as Kenyans. Yes.
Interesting. I saw they were identifying you on the name tag as Irene. This is not Irene Otieno. This is Dr. Mary Mbithi, and she is Senior Lecturer of Economics, University of Nairobi, and also part of the Women's Hub.
Women's Economic Empowerment Hub of University of Nairobi.
Women's Economic Empowerment. And that's how she knows those statistics of 58%. Yes. Of informal businesses
owned by women.
Are owned by women. All right. I saw Wanjiku cheering her on. Let's bring in Dr. Mercy Nabwire. She's coming to us from Eldoret. Civil servants have also had a lot to say on this Finance Bill 2023. But first, let's get your general sense.
Thank you very much for inviting me to the show. So I'll talk about the Kenya Medical Practitioners, Pharmacists and Dentists Union, which is a union that represents doctors practicing in Kenya in both the public and private sectors of the economy. But generally, trade unions exist to represent the interests and welfare of workers, both in the formal and informal economies of our country. And so on this proposed finance bill, we are seeing that as workers, we have been targeted, and especially the public sector workers on matters taxation. We have seen an introduction of several deductions from the pay slips of work. And all this is coming at a time when the country is experiencing, like when we are going through very harsh economic times, the cost of living is rising, the rate of inflation is rising, and we know that workers deserve decent wages and fair remuneration. Workers are the ones who run and build an economy, because a worker has to wake up in the morning to go and work in a hospital, to go and work in a factory, to go to the market. Economy basically run by workers, and workers are deserving of fair remuneration. And it is, when I talk about fair remuneration, what do I mean? I mean that you need to be paid wages or salaries that can sustain your lifestyle over, consistently. And for these to happen, it means that salaries, wages that workers get should always be commensurate to the existing economic situation in a country. But over the years, we've seen that despite the GDP growing, despite the rates of inflation going up, salaries have consistently lagged behind. And this continuously erodes the purchasing power of workers. And now we are seeing, we are in a situation where the cost of everything is rising, the cost of fuel, the cost of basic commodities, the cost of education. We know that right now, the government is adopting privatization as a policy, meaning everything will have to be paid for. But what are we seeing the government doing on the other hand? They are going after the workers' pay slips. They are raiding it. We are seeing increments in deductions of National Hospital Insurance Fund to the tune of almost 3% of the gross earnings. We are seeing the housing levy introduced unconstitutionally against the Employment Act, but workers are going to be forced to pay these monies. We are seeing an increment. We saw like an increment in the NSSF. So basically at the end of the day, a worker from their payslip will take home 42%, 48% of their earnings, and 52% remain with government in terms of deductions. But what is this basically going to do to the worker? This is going to erode their purchasing power. And so we are looking at the proposed finance bill as a way that the workers are consistently being pushed into poverty against their will. And as workers in this country, we are resisting this because we have not been consulted, and the law is quite clear on how salaries are to be handled, that a worker's salary cannot be raided, cannot be deducted unless the worker has been consulted. And there exists mechanisms of consultation, mechanisms of, dialogue between the various social partners in the country, that is government, employers, and workers' representatives. This has not taken place. This has not happened. We just woke up one day and we are being told that your pay slips, like once this bill goes through, now this is what you'll have to face as workers, and you have to contend with it despite the rising cost of living. We are feeling bullied into poverty. We are feeling, that our voice, our, space in terms of democracy is shrinking by the day. And we are calling upon government to use the existing mechanisms of social dialogue that exist to engage workers so that we can agree on how this economy that is run by workers can effectively serve and meet the needs of workers in this country. So that is our position as public sector workers, and we are putting the government on notice on this matter that we are not going to accept this raid on our meager earnings. We have not seen salaries being increased, and we are staring at poverty even as we face these harsh economic times.
Okay. And speaking of workers, and you can tell that Dr. Mercy Nabwire feels